Hello and welcome to week 2 in Introduction to Psychology. And as I'm working, this is the second semester creating these weekly videos, and I'm still working on format and whatnot. I think that what I'm going to be doing each week is kind of quickly go through the sections of the course book that are for this week, really focusing on that. And maybe in terms of the structure of the class and how you approach it, might I suggest that for the best use of your time, that you start by reading the course book and getting into the assignments and whatnot. And then when you've completed all that, round off your knowledge of that area by going into the textbook and reading that information. Although on occasion there will be information that is actually coming from the textbook, not necessarily in the course book, but that might be the better sequence. So you get the course book material done first, and then you get and the assignments and everything for that week, and then kind of relax at the end of the week reading up on the general concerns and whatnot in the textbook. And please do that, because what you're getting in the course book is really my favorite things to talk about. And they may not be your favorite things that are in that chapter. And certainly, I don't believe I'm as good a writer as the textbook author. So please go and read that textbook to fulfill the completion of your experience here. So to that end, we are in week 2, and I'm hopeful that most of you have found your way around Brightspace. But let's take a look at Brightspace first. Here we have the entry point into the class. Of course, the week 2 video is not up. But essentially, when you come in here, you look at the announcements to see if there's anything, and then you go to content. And this is really where the heart of the class is. Now, I've opened up the timeline here. That's where oftentimes it'll bring you right into this place. It'll essentially open up in the last place you were in. So don't worry, it might look different when you go into the content area, because it's going to bring you back to the last time you were actually logged into the site. But we look here, and we look, here's the timeline, of course, what's due each week. And let's look at course documents. Just as a review to get that whole course book, textbook thing, you go into the course documents here, textbook and course book information. And here you can download, this will actually bring you to the website to download various versions of the psychology textbook. And here's the links to the course book. The PDF one will often open up right in your browser. So feel free to right click, or if you're using a laptop, learn how to do that, right click and download the file itself, and then you can open it up and you don't have to be online. The same applies to the EPUB, but the EPUB is really meant to go onto a tablet device and be read with those kinds of devices, whether it's an iPad or an Android version tablet. I don't think it matters. It's really made for tablet use. The PDF one is fine, and so please feel free to use the PDF one. That's why it's there, and it is a much smaller file. Now, so what I want to do is switch gears here, and we're looking right now, we've finished chapter 1, an introduction to psychology, and now we are looking at chapter 2. Let me get the course book ready here. I was searching around to see what I was going to talk about. So let's take a look at the course book now. So here we are in chapter 2, psychological research. And as we make our way through the book, the first section, of course, is attention getter. And what I bring to light here is the fact that the field of psychology is actually, I guess, wrestling with the fact that a lot of the data that we have, the two things, select populations that do not include minorities and other special populations, those are underrepresented in the history of psychology, and the fact that some of the great studies that have formulated our knowledge base are proving difficult to repeat or to replicate in the new era, because people are changing. And so this kind of upheaval is both scary and exciting. Human beings resist understanding. And this is just really kind of driving that home. So the material is still great. What we do as scientific thinkers is we look at our theories and our models and we say, well, most of the time this is the stuff that's going on, but we're always open to people who are outliers or they're anomalies to the various things, because that's really what gives our humanity the richness and diversity that it is. And at this time in history, appreciating the richness of diversity and differences between people is so important in order for us to move forward as a species, if not as a nation. So there's a little bit about that at the beginning of the course book, going into the issues with replication. And then we look at the learning outcomes. What are you going to get out of Chapter 2? And so explain scientific research, why it's important to use a scientific method, the actual methods that we use, produce the reliability of this material, demonstrate the use of statistical analysis in decision making, and identify ethical issues with particular approaches to research with humans. Now, again, to kind of emphasize, one of the meta goals of a course like psychology is really to get you to start thinking about things in a scientific way. So I'm going to use just as a sort of a basis for that kind of thinking. Usually, when we are making everyday decisions, we turn to the people around us and we think about it, and we look at our experiences, and we look at what's worked before and what our culture says, just in our own world, and primarily looking to friends and people on what is known as our committee, our looking glass committee, which you'll learn about later. Certainly you'll learn a lot about when you take sociology. And we use that to make decisions about what we're going to do. So there are, however, some important decisions that we need to make that reliance on our immediate circle may not be the best way to go. So let's just say we're having discussions now in my family about getting the vaccine for COVID-19. So there's a member of my family who feels reluctant to get it, even though there's a number of healthcare professionals in the family that are like, what do you mean? So there's obviously a difference. And when we explore that particular individual's perspective of this, they're limiting their scope to the people that they know. Well, I know a person who got the vaccine, their arm inflated, blah, blah. I don't know what's in there. I don't know, those kinds of things. And these are certainly valid concerns. The difference, however, in that kind of decision is that you're really looking at what science has determined by necessity has to be a collective behavior for collective benefit. So I'm in favor, per se, of getting the vaccine, not only to protect myself from getting sick, because getting COVID is not fun. Many people recover without any long-term effects. A very small number of people die, but there's a much larger number of the people that come permanently impacted by that lung function. I don't want it. But that's not the only reason I'm taking the vaccine. I'm taking the vaccine because I buy into the notion from science that if enough people get vaccinated, we can develop a nationwide, quote unquote, herd immunity. Our natural immune systems will be enough that the incidence of that particular virus goes down to controllable levels. Now, to go that path, you have to rely on not your immediate circle. You have to go beyond that and rely on data and science and look at those sources of information to inform your decisions. And what we're going to be doing in the sciences, in this field, is we're going to be looking at that data. We have opinions, but as we become more and more educated and more scientific, our opinions become more and more informed by more reliable and more valid sources of information than my own experience and my own social circle. And that is truly the critical thinking part of why you are required, for instance, to take courses like psychology, which have strong opinions and theories and whatnot about very personal things, of which you may have very different opinions, but yet the science is speaking in a particular direction that may be not the same as the way you see the world. And that's part of the critical thinking of finding your own personal balance between your own opinions based on your own experience and what science is telling us. Particularly in an era right now where science is being sort of pushed aside a little bit politically. And so we need to be extra careful that we take into account how we make decisions based on personal experience and how we need to shift some of that perspective into a scientific one. So the methods section that is part of almost every social science class, you have an introduction to the social science, and then chapter 2 is almost always about methods. And what the methods chapter really focuses on is how do we gather information, how do we measure things, and how do we make decisions and predictions and theories and models that explain, predict, and possibly even allow us to intervene or control human behavior. How do we do that so that there's integrity to what we're saying? And that's really where methods comes in. So let's dive into the course book here with the content and see how we can explore that. So we got off here, like, first off, as you're going into, this is the EPUB version right now that's sitting on my iBooks app on my laptop. And you might see something like this. You'll just see the video right here. But the first time you go through one of these course books, go ahead and click on this, and it'll say, yes, I want to connect this to the internet, allow, and there you go. The video that I wanted to embed is now embedded there, but it also embeds them for the rest of the book. So we'll find another video here. See, right there, it embed. If I had gone ahead to that, it would have said, it would have been that little gray box again. But as soon as you click that, it takes care of the whole book. So you only have to do that once. So let's go back to the beginning of this chapter. And let's look at what we're saying about the methods. First off, I really want you to watch these videos. These videos are a crash course in psychology. I sprinkled a whole bunch of them across the course. Those are really good. And here's kind of what I've been talking about. Why do we want to get scientific? What is the purpose of using reliable and valid methods to make decisions about human behavior? So we get into that. Then we move here to the scientific method, the advantages of the scientific method, just quickly going through the outline. Why psychology is a difficult science. As I said, I'm kind of mentioning a little bit that human beings, they don't want to be pigeonholed. They don't want to be defined easily. And that's not only a social motivation, but we're peculiar in that we are very, very diverse in terms of our behavior. Of all the animals on the planet, many non-human species, we are much more able to predict their behavior because their fund of knowledge and the diversity of their responses to stimuli are pretty straightforward and oftentimes instinctual, built into the genetic coding of their brain. Human beings are unpredictable. They really are. They defy a definitive equation, let's say. Unlike mathematics and some of the more hard sciences, like, I don't mean difficult, but, solid scientists, biology and physics and chemistry and those kind of things that have much more predictive models. We end up in psychology with a lot of theories, or like, this is what we kind of think is going on, and ultimately it only really works out that way a certain percentage of the time. So we're really in a gray area, but that's sometimes what's really so fascinating about studying the world of psychology, is that gray, that we have these models and they're great and they help us to advance the world and take care of ourselves, take care of others, but they're not as precise as the kind of theories and models and even laws that you will see in the other sciences. So I give the example of causes of spousal abuse, not a pleasant topic, but certainly an important one, as a way to explore the diverse reasons why something like that might happen. So then we go into research methodology, and this is when I talk about some of the methods, the broader methods. We can look at case studies. This is an individual case, maybe someone who's really different than the models. You know, we might have like a particular manifestation of schizophrenia, let's say, and in this particular individual, there might be certain things that are unique. That maybe never seen before. Those case studies have really limited generalizability, but they do reveal the diversity of human psychology. So here we have the clinical case study. We have naturalistic observations, just observing people as they are acting in the world. We have surveys and where we design questions for people to answer, and the advantages and limitations of those kinds of research methods. We have archival research where we're looking at existing records, you know, things that have been documented already, and we're looking for relationships that possibly exist. So let's say I was looking at people who graduated in the line worker program at KVCC, and I can look at their final grades, and then I can see, is there a relationship between those final grades and how well they did on their research paper for English Comp. And I could look at existing records. I don't have to talk to anybody. I can just look at existing records that are out there and study that relationship without even having people involved. Now, another set of research methodologies that we have are longitudinal, which we're studying a group of people or studying a case study over a long period of time, and cross-sectional, where we're looking at changes that might occur over time, something that you'll be deeply introduced to when you take developmental psych, which is really that adding time to all this. And we're looking at, in a cross-sectional study, we would say, okay, we're looking at how intelligence changes over time. And so we would have a group of people that are 5, a group of people that are 10 years old, a group of people that are 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, and we measure differences between them. So you have longitudinal where you're looking at people over time, but you know, everybody's aging. You as a researcher might never see the end of your study. You might age out of your own study. So that's the disadvantage of that. But in the disadvantage of the cross-sectional is the person who is 60 today grew up in a very different world than the person who's 10 today. And then we're using a modern measure of intelligence. So that we have to take those things into consideration when we're looking for changes over time. And we have that kind of balance of longitudinal and cross-sectional. And there's even a hybrid of that where we're looking at different groups of people and then we examine them over a period of time. It's kind of a combination of both longitudinal and cross-sectional styles of research. So the next one here, we have experiments. Now, experiments are situations in which we place individuals in artificial circumstances. We're controlling all of the variables as much as we can so that we can pinpoint primarily a cause-effect relationship between two variables. So if I wanted to measure, let's say, the effectiveness of using PowerPoint slides on student comprehension in a psychology class, I might create an experiment, randomly assign people to the different groups, so there's no real differences between the two groups. I give one group a lecture with PowerPoints. I give another group a lecture without PowerPoints. Same time of day, everything. I just try and make both groups as similar as possible. So the only difference between them is the PowerPoints or not, and then measure their comprehension on the same test. And so if there's any statistically significant differences between those groups, then that would reveal itself as probably caused by the differences between whether they had PowerPoint or not. So these are constructed, fabricated situations. We hear about these all the time, and as we're going into some of the more famous studies in psychology in America, in American psychology, some really wacky experiments that essentially contributed to the development of something we'll get into in just a little bit, the ethics associated with doing experiments with human beings. So we have here this video of one of the more famous ones, the obedience study by Stanley Milgram. As a person who's taken psychology, you should be familiar. If anybody, the Milgram shock experiment or something like that, this is a little video to give you a little bit on that. So all of these, this is all factors related to that. Now over here we have a link to the National Institute of Health Guiding Principles for Ethical Research. Almost every field has guidelines for working with people, ethical guidelines. The National Institute of Health has an overriding set of principles that apply to everything from psychological studies to the vaccination tests that they were doing to produce the current vaccine. If you have subjects that are being put at risk, there's all kinds of variables that have to be accounted for. There's all kinds of safety protocols that have to be accounted for. Again, that's part of it was a quick, no doubt, we know that it was a very fast procedure to get this out because of the sense of emergency behind this particular pandemic. But many, if not all of those guidelines were still followed to make sure that individuals knew what they were getting into, that protocols for safety were followed, that medical procedures were up to snuff in terms of how they were being done. All the regular safety mechanisms were in place, even though there was a rapid production of that particular vaccine. So this is an interesting document to read, an interesting place to go, and it's going to be part of one of our assignments this week. So you'll have to click on that link and go explore that website. So here we are going into decision making regarding if we have engaged in this cyclical process. That's why the graphic is circle. You just keep doing this over and over and over when you're doing research. And if we have engaged in there, we can then equip ourselves to make scientific, informed, data-driven, research-based decisions. That's a lot of adjectives. So here we define our question, we gather our information. These are the steps we go through. Here's a difference between scholarly and popular periodicals or journals, and ultimately going through the scientific method, we come up with a question, we define our hypotheses based on the preponderance of what we already know. How do we think this is going to go? We take an educated guess, and that's hypothesis, and then we engage in the process of hypothesis testing, where either through archival data or an interview or through a survey or an experiment, we collect data on the variables that we are interested in, the factors that we think we want to have some sort of, we're looking for a relationship between those, and we gather that data in a very methodical way. Oftentimes, it involves statistical analysis, so there's some math that determines the degree to which your results are because of your experiment or because of the natural variability of people in the world. You might have got these results by chance. It might not have anything to do with the variables that you're studying. So that chance component is what we try to eliminate with methods and statistical analysis. If we can't prove or show or demonstrate that our results would be really, really unlikely to happen by chance, so therefore they're really, really probably due to our variable, that strengthens our argument. So here's we form our hypothesis, we define our variables very precisely. Please read this again. It tells you more than I said about variables, about how we do that. The null hypothesis versus the experimental hypothesis, and that whole methods. We test the hypothesis, analyze data, interpret data, come to our conclusions, publish, and then do it all over again. And this is the cycle of science, new things coming out. And truthfully, one of the things that's happened in this pandemic is that for many people, for the first time, the public was exposed to the scientific process. So as science engaged in understanding COVID-19, it began to publish its results very quickly. Science to the public. Science usually does that publishing, but the public is not interested in that. They're interested in final outcomes. So what we saw happen that really sort of threw some people off from scientists, that scientists were switching. What you need to understand is scientists switch all the time. It's not that the methods that they're using are not scientific or they don't know what they're talking about, is that they're in the process of discovery. So therefore, like, this is what we know now, and then something else comes along and go, whoops, that doesn't apply anymore. This is what we know now. And most of the time, we're hidden from that. We get the final product. When we got the iPhone, we got version number 427 or something like that. So 427 versions of that. If we had got one of those early versions, we would have thrown it away. It would have been a useless device. But we were never exposed to that. All we got was the final perfect product. Often in science, that's the way we experience it. In COVID, we experience science live. We are still experiencing science live as we discover things, as new strains come out that are challenging scientists, and they're going out there and trying to figure this thing out and how to respond to it. What's the utility of a mask? How far apart we should be? And we really feel like, wow, do these people really even know what they're talking about? Well, they do. And the truth changes. Our understanding of what the truth is changes. So we have to keep up with science. Like, this is what science is telling us today, okay? Tomorrow might be different. Tomorrow there might be something that they discover, and we need to be a little light on our feet during this particular time. And it's a unique time because it demands the American public, the world public, to understand that scientific process, that it's not. We always see science as kind of like definitive, and it's revealing the truth, that science works toward that definitiveness. In 10 years, we'll understand COVID. But right now, we have to act on the fly almost, but still rely on our latest scientific information. So all the more important for us to be looking to science to give us guidance on what to do and what not to do in regard to this pandemic. So we look at quantitative research and statistics, a little bit about that, and correlations not being cause-effect. Kind of going right through this pretty quickly. Qualitative research, which doesn't involve math, and some different kinds of research methods. Here we have ethnographies. It's actually a study of a culture or an ethnic group or an individual within that. And in the social psychology class, you do an autoethnography. That's actually the major assignment in there. So you engage into an analysis of your own personal interactions between your personality and who you are and the social upbringing that you were engaged in. Great assignment. There's narratives, people's stories. Phenomenological, where we're looking at the experience of particular things. You know, what was the impact of the first Star Wars movie coming out? Or what phenomenological research going on right now about the impact of COVID and isolation, teaching online. These are very, very active areas of research right now, looking at how does this phenomenon impact people. We have grounded theory, case studies. You can read up on those, different ways in which we do qualitative research. And then we enter into the assessment area. This is the to-do list for this week. We have, I ask you in the discussion to review examples of the 20 most unethical studies in psychology. Always fun to look at our past, having that 2020 vision. Compare those to the standards of those NIH guidelines and discuss, where did this one go wrong? In fact, that experiment that went wrong may have produced the guideline. So where did the experiment go wrong? And then when you're looking at other people's posts, I'm sort of, in one of your reply posts, remember you have to do one major post and two reply posts, speculate how they could have changed their particular experimental method to make it more ethical. Maybe they should have told everybody what they were doing. Maybe they should have provided exit counseling, or maybe they shouldn't have done it at all. Explore some alternatives to what was done. The next part of the expectations for this week is a 3-question quiz. The first is explain to me why it's important to have valid and reliable methods in this field. Consider the following research question. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted levels of stress in healthcare providers? Identify which variables is the independent variable and which is the dependent variable. So you're going to have to look that up. Look up independent and dependent variable. And then finally, we have consider that same question and construct how you would explore that question, looking at the variables that you picked in the question 2. How would you look at archival data? Not a survey, not an interview, not a case study, not an experiment. You're looking at existing records. Where would you find existing records on that? Remember I said about the example about students' performance. I could look at my line workers. I can look at existing records we have on how well they did in English 101, and I can look at existing records on how well they did in graduating, their ultimate GPA, and I can compare those grades. That's data that exists in a database. I'm not doing anything else. So thinking about where would you find information about stress in healthcare workers? Where would that be? And I want you to creatively think about that and answer that question accordingly. There's week 2. I hope this has been helpful in clarifying my expectations. Please participate in the discussions early. Participate vigorously. Get all those postings done. There's some people that need you to post so they can reply early in the week. So be those people that get this, get into there really soon, and be sure to continue using the course questions and student in the course lounge for other kinds of posting. And I will see you in the discussion boards.